Greetings, everyone. This is Mike Riley, the voice of Ironman. And this is the Old School Tri Show with my Kiwi mates Cameron Harper and Brian Ashby. The show that talks about all things triathlon, old and new. We're powered by Ansco Foods, bringing you nutrition and good health from New Zealand's beef and lamb. Thanks for listening, everyone. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome along to another episode of the Old School Tri Show, brought to you by our great friends at Ansco Foods. And today, Brian, well, the inspirational stories of former champions for Ironman New Zealand just keep coming, don't they? And this gentleman is no exception, as usual.
From an orphanage to a global corporate high flyer with a stellar Ironman career in between, you couldn't make this stuff up. Today, we talk to the 1991 Ironman New Zealand champion, Dirk Aschmoneit.
Ansco Foods is proud to be the new naming partner of Ironman New Zealand, ensuring every stroke, pedal and stride is powered by the best nature has to offer. Ansco Foods is on a mission to bring nutrition and good health from New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Ansco Foods, putting the iron in Ironman with New Zealand's finest beef and lamb. Visit anscofoods.com/Ironman to find out more.
Dirk, it's wonderful that you've given your time to us today and fantastic to have you on board. And preparing for this chat today, it's just really inspiring to learn all the things you've done in your life, not just within Ironman, but how you got there and how you've sort of followed up your career on the back of it. But I just wonder the determination and drive to succeed on so many different levels in your life, I guess in some ways was shaped from your very early life as a young boy.
Yeah, I think people read a lot, right? And I'm pretty open about it. There's no secrets. And I think I mentioned earlier that when you look at a lot of high-performing athletes, there's some traumatic event sometimes that leads them to who they are today. I'm not going to name names, but we all know very famous people that either didn't have parents or one parentless, no father figure, and they made it up with sports. And in my case, it was very similar. And I believe that my journey and the reason I tried to use sports as, call it medicine or an escape, was based on that I didn't feel accepted, that I didn't feel loved, or I needed a place because I was abandoned early, put in an orphanage, foster homes. My mom took me back at the age of 6, but it's a different thing, right? You never build that relation. There's like just a level of trust that doesn't exist. I see it with my kids. I see it with my new wife's kids, how it's a very, very different relation that I never had. And I'm honest about it. And people shouldn't judge me on that. I just don't work that way because I never experienced that way. So sports really became that escape where I felt I can prove myself. And in one interview in 2011 in Germany, I really came to the conclusion that I was looking for that acceptance, that love, not in a real bad way that I wanted to be loved by the nation or all these people, but I wanted to be accepted. And sports was a way to show that, hey, listen, I'm here. I'm good. I'm a good kid. I'm a good boy. Why don't I have the same opportunities like everybody else? And I see that in other athletes when you follow their journey, right? It doesn't matter if it's different races or different upbringing. It doesn't really matter, but a lot of people are driven that way.
I'm guessing as a little guy, in the same way, looking at what you've sort of done later in life, you're a pretty good kid at school too. You know, you worked really hard. You wanted to sort of push yourself ahead. You saw the opportunities that through studying and working hard that might come your way.
Yes and no. You know, I have to admit, in the beginning, I was kind of like a class clown because, again, I thought being a class clown, that gets you acceptance. But I realized pretty fast, like in 8th grade, that didn't really work well because I had to repeat 8th grade. And I failed. So when you fail in Germany, you have I think 2 Fs. You have to repeat the grade. And one of the Fs was in geography. And I grabbed my head and I said, how can you fail in geography? Right? How can you fail? I can understand how you can fail in math, physics, chemistry, like the hard topics, but geography, come on. So that was a rude awakening, and I realized maybe class clown, being always the funny guy, is not the right way to get ahead. So from then, I really focused on studying and applied myself. So I learned my lesson. It's a lot about learning lessons and apply yourself. And yes, you're right. Became a straight A student. Went to dental school, which is the same like medical school in Germany. It's one and the same. It's just different path. And you have to have good grades to get into that. Yes, absolutely. And then sports was just, and you see it was just watching the swimming events right now in the Olympics. A lot of the swimmers, they spend hours and hours in the pool, but they're also incredibly bright. Right? We always used to solve our math problems in the pool because you're counting so many tiles that we brought our math problems to the team and go like, oh, this is the problem. And by the end of the practice, somebody came up with a good idea to solve the problems, right? So you work with incredibly smart people in sports, especially in these endurance sports, I believe.
What was it like growing up in Germany? Where in Germany were you brought up when you were a young person?
So if I would speak German, people would know because I speak what they call the High German, the Hochdeutsch, with accent free. And I grew up close to Hamburg, basically dead center of Hamburg and the border of Denmark. So one hour on the bike to the Northern Sea, 1 hour on the bike to the Baltic Sea, basically dead center, flat like a pancake. We always used to say, you can see today who comes tomorrow for lunch. That's how flat it was. So the wind there, like in the Dutch, right? The Dutch are good, the Belgians are good cyclists, and it's not very mountainous there. But the wind becomes your mountains. That's how you train there. So that's where I grew up. Did my primary, secondary education there, and did my military service, which was back then mandatory. Did it there, and then after college, really decided to. What you just mentioned, that New Zealand has like snow and it's cold, and I decided 13 degrees Celsius doesn't really work well for triathlon. If I want to get this right, I think I have to go to San Diego and California where the big dogs train with the big dogs. And that's what I did after I graduated.
Let's wind the clock back, though. You mentioned the military service. That was kind of key to getting you into the sport, wasn't it?
Yes, that's actually was a very funny part. I didn't want to do it, I have to admit. So let's unwind it. So, in the military, I had the opportunity. First of all, I was drafted into a sports academy, which was really awesome. And then I also was trained as a medic for the SEALs team. And through that, I had the opportunity to go to California and train in San Diego, where the U.S. SEALs are based. And that was an exciting opportunity. And shortly after that, some of the SEALs said, hey, there is a triathlon. I'm like, what's a triathlon? Well, this is triathlon, and look at this magazine. And one of the magazines printed like this, it was they called them all crazy. It spoke about the race, and I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, this is really crazy. This is not going to last. Who does that? But in the military, if you do like a team event, and it was a team event, a team of 5, if you do well, you get extra vacation. And so you play part of a team and you say, yep, I go. And it was a disaster. I don't know if you remember that. I was like a great swimmer first out of the water. And the reason the SEALs asked me to go, because I was actually a better runner than I was a swimmer. And I came off the bike, I think in 6th place, and I was all excited. Never really trained biking other than riding my bike to school. But I thought, man, coming in 6th place off the bike, that's good. Now my strongest event, the running, that should be a good race. Oh my God, cramp after cramp after cramp. You learn, again, another lesson learned. Don't underestimate it. And honestly, initially, as I said, I thought this is crazy stuff. I got hooked. Failure really got me hooked. And I said again, there's no way, like in school, like 8th grade, there's no way I can do this. And same with sport. Failure got me hooked. And I said, there's no way I can train my body to get off the bike and run what I used to run. And I used to run like a 123, back then, a 123 over 25K. Nowadays, that's probably not fast anymore. But back then, that was respectable.
Respectable, yeah.
And I ended up running 125 in like a triathlon. Like our distances were different back there. It was not as standardized, right? It was like 1.5K swim, just to warm up, 80K bike, and 25K. But to run a 125 off the bike is still nowadays pretty fast. That's like a 112 half marathon, probably 111. Yeah. That's still fast.
Yeah, yeah. So you'd like this was about 1983 when you did your first race, and you were hooked at that point, and so just tell us about your progression over the next year or two, and did you see a career in it, or just talk us through that?
You know what? So the first race, 83, I thought was complete failure. I placed 25th. When I tell people nowadays, they think, "Oh God, you're so arrogant. You placed 25th in your first race and you thought it was failure." But again, you have to follow the journey, right? Coming off the
Mm.
bike takes
Yeah.
thinking running is your best event, and then you fail. So from my eyes, it was failure. And then in 84, we had European Championships where I met Jürgen Zech the first time.
Mm.
And you know what a great athlete he is.
Mm.
And he passed me on the bike, and his eyes, you could tell in his eyes, he's an excellent biker. And he just looked at me and later told me, God, I saw this big guy because I was big. Swimmers are big, right?
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh my God, I'm already catching this guy. Well, he's big. He can't run." Well, he was way off, right? I took him down after 5K like there was no tomorrow. We became best friends after that. But won the European Championships. I think it was a 30K run, and I ran it in like 150 off the bike, which was phenomenal. And then 85 went to Nice, and
Yeah.
Mark won, as we all know, right? A phenomenal athlete again. Molina, Timley, and then Rob Burrell, and I placed fifth. So that was a breakthrough. And then 86, we had the German Championships at the Ironman, where you have now the Ironman Rothman. Now it's Challenge Roth, but back
Yeah.
then it was Ironman. And won the national championships. And the organizer was very smart. He invited Timley because he knew that, and I'm going to that a little bit. He knew that, there's a lot of races, but the races that really get the media attention, those are the important ones.
Yeah.
And I realized that. So I joined him, and it was all about the PR, the awareness. And I won that, and Tinley joined, and Tinley placed second. So the headline was this German Rambo. That's, I think, where I got the German Rambo name.
Human Rambo, yeah.
Which I really didn't like, but because they took my military background, which again, it's mandatory, right? I didn't like the combination of taking the military background and then overlaying Sylvester Stallone and then me. And I didn't really like it, but it made the headlines, and I go like, okay, just roll with it, right? Roll with it. It's a good thing. Got a lot of coverage. Saw Tinley and Allen in a lot of races, and you know what kind of like was accepted. And then 87, first injuries, right? You have a real rapid start, a lot of training, but you pay the price, right? And so stress fracture, the whole season gone. And then 88 was probably a big breakthrough, placed seventh in Kona. And that was the first European really placing in the top 10.
Yeah.
And the Americans knew what was coming, right? Because they seen me in the races before, but it took me a while to put it together. Like all of them, like Allen, it took him 6 times to win it.
Yeah.
It's not like you show up and win. And back then they always said no European would show up and win it because you had to learn your lesson, the humidity, et cetera, et cetera. So I take a break there in 88, but that was pretty much another breakthrough where the German media then said, oh, good, he's an American challenger. And I think that was the first. Well, let's go to Ironman in New Zealand, but that was the first time a European really broke in the top 10. And I think it started shifting the weight over to the Europeans a little bit more in terms of the Americans dominated, and now there are European challengers. That's kind of like how the headlines shifted. But it took still a couple of years, as we all know, another 10, until the real shift was gone.
Yeah.
And, they always say it takes 10 years to be really good in a sport. Like when you look at exercise physiology, you just don't show up and win in the first year. It takes a long time.
Yeah. You because if we go back, you had some success in France, I think in 86, and then that got you to Kona for the first time. Is that correct?
Yeah, 86 was 86. I won the national championships, and then a week later I won. It was not a full Ironman on Brown.
Oh, yeah,
which was 130K on the bike, but it was a lot of mountains, so it took you the same time, right? So it was a lot of vertical climbing. And I won that as well. So again, I gained a lot of attention. And then with the winning club team back then, which was kind of like an offspring of Triathlete magazine and Winning Club magazine back then. We were invited to race in Kona, Aaron Baker, myself, Rob Burrell, and that didn't go well. I came off the bike with Tinley because I raced with him in the championship. So we kind of like, we befriended and we were friends, came off the bike with him. But once I hit the halfway point, like half marathon point, out to the airport, I blew up because Europeans are just not used to the humidity. The heat is one thing, but then you have 97% humidity, that your body just can't handle it. So that was, again, a lesson learned. And I told myself, okay, I'm going to come back with a vengeance. The next time around, I figured this out. And that was 88, 7th. I think Mark Allen was 5th, but he had a flat. Molina won.
Yes.
Right. But again, I came back with not a vengeance, but hey, I can do this. And I showed that I can do it.
Dirk, one of the interesting things just you mentioned, like in 88, and I think you and Ray Browning sort of finished one after the other at Kona that year. And Ray was something of a pioneer. We chatted with him maybe 6 months ago, something of a pioneer with heart rate training. So were you. Did you guys sort of collude at all? Were you doing it independently, or did you sort of, was that something that you were both, you both really led the way in terms of training and racing with heart rate monitors?
Yeah, it's funny. Everybody takes a path. I know Mark started working with an exercise physiologist and did heart rate based training. I think we all started realizing that you can train harder and harder, but it doesn't only go so far. How many hours can you spend? So at one point you have to realize you have to train smarter. And for me, the insight was when I was in dental school, I spent a lot of time, way too much time in the exercise phys lab, which was right adjacent to the dental school. And I was reading through a magazine and I saw this ad for the strap around your chest and heart rate. And they actually talked about, that was like probably late 85. And they were talking about how they would use it for rehab to keep people under 120 heartbeats. So I contacted the company. It was Polar, but I contacted the German distributor, which was in Hamburg, very close to my school. And I contacted them and I said, you got this all wrong. This is not about keeping people down. This is keeping them down, but for extreme athletes, right? Because they're all training too hard, too much. They always thought more is better, and they went by perceived exertion, which just doesn't work. And yeah, to your point, I started studying it more and more. And, I couldn't comprehend when they told me you were like this one. They told me, all these athletes train at 4 to 6 millimole lactic acid, but actually in an Ironman, you're racing at 1 to 2. And I'm like, oh, interesting. So what should I train? Well, you should train at 1 to 2. Well, how slow is that? And they said, well, put your heart rate monitor at 144 beats and run a long run. Oh my God. I started running. The thing wouldn't stop beeping because you have that beep, right? That tells you you're going to. I was so frustrated. I ran slow. So I would run my runs like, let's say 330 per K, 340 on a slow day. And this thing wouldn't shut up. I had to go 4 minutes, 4:10. I was so embarrassed. I went into the woods so nobody could see me. Into the forest. You're supposed to be strong. You're a good runner, right? So I went in the forest. I think I had to run like 420 kilometer pace to bring it finally down to 144. But similar to Ray, probably. What I learned was that because you have to train your fat metabolism, right? And you have to work at that 1 millimole threshold to get through the race. And back then, too, we touch on that later, nutrition was not where we had it today, or we have it today. Nowadays, every 5 miles you have an aid station. Well, that we didn't have that back then. You had to carry your food if you wanted to, right? So, but let's pace ourselves. So yes, heart rate was a big game changer. I basically pioneered it in the big parts of Western Europe. There were a couple of Finnish people that worked with Polar on it. And in 88, actually on the bike, I was told, keep your heart rate under 156. That was not kind of like my level back then. And everybody passed me. And I just sat there and like, listen to what they said, 156. And I came, 27th off the bike, like top 10 out of the swim. So that's hard to swallow, right? Swallow you eat. But I knew that on the bike, you have gears and you can fake it. But on the run, I will see you again. And so, 27th off the bike and then 7th in the finish line, because I just stuck to my pace and ran a 3-hour marathon off the bike, which in 88, that is fast. Nowadays, times are completely different, right? 3 hours is nothing. You're right. I mean, Ray was he's still very tech savvy. That's what he does. But we were early. We were pioneers in that area. Definitely.
When you were coming through in your early part of your career, Dirk, and I don't mean this in a bad way, obviously you're a smart guy, you trained very effectively, but were you a naturally gifted athlete as well? Like, were you able to handle the big volumes and distances relatively easily?
I don't know. I think everybody's gifted, right? But then you see that some are more gifted. So let me give you this insight. As a kid, I played all the sports in the world, like soccer. Germany, you play soccer. We couldn't afford tennis, but I grew up in very, not poor, but very limited circumstances. So you played all the playing sports. And team sports somehow didn't really resonate with me, because I always thought I'm better than this person, but I can't play that position because it's the son of the coach or it's the son of the sponsor. So it was politics early on in life. So the reason I ended up in swimming was because I realized that when I watch swimming, whoever touches the wall first wins. There's no argument. If you're the coach's son or not, it doesn't matter. If you're not touching the wall first, it doesn't matter who you are. So I ended up in individual sports. It was black and white. And then the talent, I would say, I worked hard. I didn't start swimming until I was 14, which is really late. But I was born with a barrel chest. And first, I hated it, because you kind of like when you wear white clothes or a T-shirt that's loose, you look fat. But later on, it was a blessing, because in 83, we got examined at a big sports institute in Germany through the military. And after the examination, they had a lecture to tell all the athletes what it means. And one of the lectures was stroke volume. And they said, the highest stroke volume ever measured is 21.2 until yesterday, because as of yesterday, we have a new record of 22 point something. And everybody looked around, what happened? I said, Dirk showed up and his heart is 1,600 milliliters, so nearly 3 times the size of a normal human heart. And then you take his weight, and basically he can supply more oxygen than anybody else to his working muscles. And I'm like, interesting. You get my attention, right? And I was a 200-meter freestyler. And so after the lecture, I went to the professor and said, okay, tell me more. What does this mean? And they said, you're wasting your time in 200-meter freestyle. You're not even waking up until like 150 meters in. And I said, I realize I struggle. And the last 50 meters are good. And they said, find the longest race you can find. So hindsight later, the Ironman thing was perfect, right? And it combined swimming and running, which no sport was there where I could apply it. And I thought, cycling, you will learn that. It's just a total time and saddle. But yes, I think was I gifted? Yes, there's a lot of other people that are gifted, but I had an advantage due to my chest was really big, my heart could grow, and a lot of athletes back then were told that they actually had to stop training or racing because their chest cavity was too small and the heart got too big. So they actually were told to stop. And I said, oh my God, do I run that risk? And the professor looked at me and said, look at your chest. Look at the size. Keep going. And I'm like, keep going.
Brilliant.
So that was kind of like the combination that convinced me, you know what, you can be really good at this because you have an advantage that other people don't have.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's an incredible story. And just before we bridge across to you getting to New Zealand, Ironman New Zealand, you mentioned before what is now Challenge Road in Germany. And you sort of your relationship was more than just competing in the event, wasn't it? You were kind of involved in the organizing and so on in the early days there.
Yeah, you're very well informed. I mean, thank you. Yes, opening the door. Yeah, I always knew that. Let's go back a little bit. I think when I raced, there were times when other athletes were jealous. And they kind of like pointed to you as, God, it's all about him. It's all about him. I mean, even Jürgen back then would say, God damn, I win all these short distance races and all they talk about is Dirk. I'm like, I went to Jürgen. I mean, we were good friends. I helped him with swimming. I helped him with his training. And I said, Jürgen, it doesn't matter what races you win. It really matters that you win the pertinent one. Like Wimbledon in tennis, you can win every other tennis match. Nobody cares. But if you win Wimbledon, your name. And, once I placed in 88, 7th in Kona, guess what? All the Germans went for Ironman because they realized, oh, we're betting on the wrong horse. We're all going short distance. It doesn't get us anywhere in terms of sponsorship. So they went long distance. I realized that early on that Ironman was really, because anytime you talked outside to somebody, like when you were not in sports and you told somebody what you're doing, the first thing you would ask is, oh, you're a triathlete. Did you do Hawaii? And if you didn't do Hawaii, they all said, oh, you're not really an athlete. You're not an athlete, right? So I realized that early on. So I started working with Detlef Kühnel, who owned or who organized the Roth events early on, and said, Detlef, how can we work together on make this bigger? And we started talking in 86 to Ironman in the US to get the license. Because remember, there were no races in Europe. And the Europeans were cray-cray for triathlon. French, the Germans, they all wanted, but they had to go to, what was it? Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. It was like 7 or 8 races, but nothing in Europe. So we started talking to Ironman, David Yates and Lou Friedland back then, and said, hey, can we get a race in Germany? And then in 87, 88, we brought the Ironman to Germany. And I kind of like, we gave ourselves title. I was like director of PR or something, moved to Nuremberg to work with Detlef and try to make that another part of my life, which was good and bad because it became too much. You can't race, build the races, build the foundation. So in 90, 89, 90, it kind of like started going downhill, right? Because it just became too much. I couldn't split the times in that. And then we get to New Zealand, really, when my performance went down because it was just too much. I finished college. I started building Ironman Europe with Detlef. And then I started with Jean-Claude Garot Triathlete Magazine Germany, did that. I mean, there was just a lot that I did, and there was just too much. And then the performance suffered, right? I stretched myself just then.
But look, I mean, gosh, you look back now, and you probably don't, but it's something to be incredibly proud of because you've helped create a legacy event. It's a bucket list event for people on this side of the world. It's enormous and just it's probably the most popular in some ways event in the world. So to have been there and being a key person back then, that's something that you should be incredibly proud of.
Yeah, I mean, early on, again, there was a lot of jealousy. But what athletes, I think, later realized, once I was retired, because, over FaceTime or Facebook and all the other social media platforms, later on, people really resonated and said, thank you for what you did. But it took them time to realize, because what I tried to tell them was, unless we make the race bigger and get it to sponsors like Coca-Cola, IBM, BMW, Quelle for Roth. You cannot just always look at bike sponsors and shoe sponsors. It's too small. The universe is too small. And the whole idea of what Detlef and I did is to bring it out of that small environment, because, I mean, don't get me wrong, but you wanted a contract from a shoe company, and back then, if you got $50,000 a year, that was a lot of money, and they called you too expensive, right? And you could get a contract 10 times that much with a big national brand like Gatorade or Coca-Cola, which was not just shoes. And that's what people had to understand. That's what they had to break through. Yeah. And the only way to do that was to get out of the sports magazines and get into the big media. Like in 1988, after Hawaii, I had a cover page in the Frankfurter Allgemeine, which is the equivalent of New York Times, cover page, a 16-page autobiography, or like a little biography. That was a breakthrough, because now all the big sponsors, IBM, the managers went on the airplane on Friday to fly home and opened it up and go like, wow, who is this? What is this about? Can you look at this? Yeah. Right? And it was not just the Saucony or the Nike that looked at it and go like, that's triathlon. That's maybe $50,000. It's not worth the money, because you have to plan a career, right? You can't do that until you're 60 or 70 years old. It's short, 20 years tops, 25.
Yeah, amazing. Dirk, what prompted you to come to New Zealand in 1991? You'd moved to San Diego, and I just wonder, there were, as you said before, there weren't too many races around the world, but was that Californian influence? Some of those lads had been down here a few times and had made the journey to New Zealand. Was your arm twisted by one of them, or was it a bucket list event? What made you come to New Zealand? What was key behind that decision?
I mean, New Zealand was really a long-term, like part of a long-term plan. And I mentioned that 89 had another stress fracture, unfortunately, second one, and that year didn't go well. So 90, I got too distracted with other stuff. So we decided, and that was Detlef who organized or put Ironman Europe on place. Him and a couple in our PR team, etc., said, Dirk, you have to step out and focus on the career, because you're not helping us right now. You're stretched too thin, and the way you help is to go back to racing and make yourself bigger in racing. So the plan was to go for 91, have a good race in Roth. They also had that world champ. Remember that World Series back then? Right? Remember that?
Yeah.
And so I basically left in August of 1990 to Boulder, started training with Alan, Tinley, Souza, Browning, Molina, everybody was up there. Then I moved to San Diego, and really Scott was phenomenal. He really took me under his wings. We trained a lot together, and then, Souza joined, Alan joined at times, Browning was there, and I got, sorry for the language now, I got my ass handed to me so many times. I died so many deaths. The hills, I came out of the flatland, right? The hills, the heat, the humidity, but it was all good. And the plan was to do New Zealand as a kickoff, to really do a pressure test, then follow it up with Australia 4 weeks later, and then prepare for Ironman Europe, and then the highlight would be Hawaii. And here's the funny part. So when I contacted New Zealand and Australia, New Zealand welcomed me with open arms. They said, great, we fly you in. Air New Zealand is our sponsor. San Diego, you come in with Tinley. Awesome. Ray and Molina, we have a full team. Thanks for picking us. And Australia goes like, this is a very tough race. It's 8 more hours. Do you have a medical certificate that you actually can do this? And I'm like, dude, I don't have time for this. So I'm going to New Zealand and have a good time. So I came to New Zealand, And then, you might know what happened, that at the award ceremony, the organizer of Australia was sitting in the audience, and he came up to me and said, "Oh God, I'm so sorry. We didn't know who you are. Would you please come and visit us in a month?" And I said, "Sure." So we're coming. It was hysterical.
But I mean, you're saying some nice things about New Zealand, but to be fair, they didn't show you a great. They didn't even seed you in the top 10, I don't think, did they? When you came here?
No, but New Zealand is such a dream country. Always. I mean, when I was a kid, like I said, I didn't grow up with money, and I never would have dreamt to go to such a beautiful country. Just what you read about it, what you hear about it, even when athletes talked about it, right? Everybody talked about. It's kind of like, you need to go to Boulder, you need to go to San Diego, but San Diego was already old because I spent time there. You need to go to New Zealand, and again, what the sport enables you to do is see the world. I always tell people that when I travel now, it's like, oh my God, I've been there, done there. Not being cocky, but being there, done that. What else? And New Zealand is just fascinating. I mean, the people are super, super nice. I spent time in the host family there. The whole area, you don't see the high-rise buildings. Everything is more suburban. The countryside is beautiful. I remember we came in 2 years later. I came back with my wife then, and we looked at it, and we actually explored to buy a bed and breakfast there in the area of Lake Taupo. And we said, God, it would be a great area to raise our kids. They can actually play in the mud, get dirty, don't have to be afraid that they get kidnapped. And the only reason we didn't do it was because when we talked to a realtor and how this all would work, he said, oh, because your economy was really bad in 93, I believe it was, like 14% unemployment, if I recollect correctly. Homes were for sale everywhere. It was really a doomsday environment. And she said, well, if you want to do this, you have to create, for every person you bring in, you have to create 2 jobs. Or like 4 jobs out of the gate, running a bed and breakfast. That doesn't sound healthy, right? So it didn't pan out, but just absolutely fell in love with the country. And always was on my bucket list, and still on my bucket list.
What was it like as a young man, like you said, Dirk, from humble beginnings in Germany to suddenly be having a free flight via all the way to New Zealand? They were paying for you to come over, and you're a professional athlete. You're doing it, flying half around the world to do an Ironman. That must have been quite cool.
Yeah, and they flew us in first class. I have to mention that.
Wow.
So Tinley and I think it was a 747 because we were upstairs, and because Air New Zealand was a sponsor. And I was like, oh, I mean, it just fell. All I can say is when it feels right. I always believe you treat people right. You treat them with respect. You treat them what they're worth. And yes, I was not seated, but I think the combination was going with Tinley and from San Diego. I was just one of them. Put him in the back, get him here, and we see what happens. And the only thing that irritated me in the race, but it irritated me in a funny way, was when at one point they said, Dirk from the US. And I'm like, I'm not from the US. I'm actually German, right? I'm still proud of that. But then on the run, they always yelled, hey, go mate, go mate. And I said, my name is not mate. My name is Dirk. I didn't know people mate. So, and your blood is not in your brain, right? It's somewhere else. But it's good memories.
Although it's a term of endearment very much. But that field, you touched on some of them, like some Melina and Tinley, Glar, Huddle, Lindbergh, Kropko, John Knight from New Zealand. That at that time, that was probably the strongest field that had been assembled in New Zealand for the race. I think you were second or third out of the water. Just tell us about how the day kind of unfolded, because you're the dude that didn't come from the cycling background, but you, my word, you had a pretty good bike that day on what was, of course, a very tough bike course.
Yeah, the bike. I rode the bike course like I think the Wednesday or Thursday before. I mean, not fast, but people would say, "Shit, you rode the whole bike course on Thursday. The race is on Saturday." Yeah, I mean, I have to write it. I have to know it, don't you? Right? I have to check it out. Well, it I think what happened was, like I said, I went to Boulder in August, and I know if I get 6 months of really good training into my body, I can cause damage. I knew that from my swimming days. I knew that from other events. If I'm focused, I can create damage. If everything falls in the right place. But there was one element I will touch on that really was the breakthrough, and that was nutrition.
Nutrition,
Which
yeah.
we back then did not understand well enough. And so I had good training. And then when I trained with Tinley and Alan and Sousa in San Diego over the winter, it's perfect conditions out there. I did another 2 altitude training camps in Boulder and then went to Columbia because Boulder was just too cold. So I went to Columbia for another altitude training camp. So I knew I was prepared in terms of like doing the right things. And the real big difference was that in the old days, we talked about heart rate, right? So in the old days, you get out of the water, heart rate is really irrelevant at that point, especially as a swimmer. You're at 176, you swim 50 minutes, you're out of the water, who cares? For swimmers, it's a warm-up. The focus is on the run. So now, how do you get to the bike? And what I realized always was that after probably 120K, my heart rate would always drop into the 140s, mid 140s. And there was nothing I could do about to get it back up. And then you believe, oh, it's all about fat burning, right? Fat burning system, blah, blah, blah. You slow down, it takes more oxygen, all that BS. And you just trot along, and then you hope you get to the finish line and run a good marathon. Well, we had an insight. And I worked with some nutritionists, and they said, as soon as you come out of the water, you eat 50 calories. 50 grams of carbs, so 200 calories. Yeah. And I said, wait, an hour in? And then just warming up. And he says, no, because we did the math, the deficit, right, that you create, and you never will exceed that deficit of 10,000 calories that you burn through. And I listened, I'm like, that makes sense. And what do I eat? And so there were no gels back then. I don't know if you remember. There weren't like all the drinks that we have now. I'm not going to name names, but we didn't have gels. And so I found this gel called Lepin from South America, from Tim Noakes. You remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. And they were big. They were not like the little cliff shots nowadays. They were like big bags. So I show up, jump on the bike with like a green fanny pack that matched my bike back then. And everybody's like, God, what is it going for? A picnic? Everybody's laughing. But I needed a fanny pack to carry these. I had to take 3 of them. Every 20 minutes, I had a timer on my watch.
Yeah.
Every 20 minutes, I was supposed to take it. I'm like, oh my God, that's so much food. But you know what it did? I watched my heart rate. We talked about it, right? I stay on my heart. And so let's go back. 80, this might be too nerdy, but I know your listeners will love this. So in 88, I told you my heart rate was 156. Otherwise, I would go too high, burn out, lactate, threshold, blah, 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 all base. Well, in New Zealand, I was told, keep it at 168. Everybody knows from 156 to 168 how fast you have to go at that rate. I mean, you're going fast, you're moving.
Yeah.
And I thought, keep it at 168 until it drops again to 140, right? Like always. It didn't.
Yeah.
Just by throwing that fuel in, the pure sugar, right? The gels, every 20 minutes, I was flying. And then that turnaround, they told me, you're 12 minutes ahead. I'm like, what? 12? What are they doing back there? Are they doing picnic? Right?
I'm the one supposed to be picnicking.
They were all laughing about my fanny pack. And I'm like, I guess I was having a picnic. And I didn't let go. I kept the heart rate. That was the first time that I was able to keep my heart rate at 168 consistent. Another big factor was I had the first head deep dish 26-inch wheels that Steve had shipped. And those, I mean, technology makes a big difference, but nutrition was number one. The head wheels, deep dish wheels, I think only Lance was riding it a couple before, made a big difference. The small wheels, the big chainring. I don't know. I think I rode a 55 on a 26-inch wheel, which was big back then. But the course, I like the course. It was up and down. It suits my riding style. I don't like to be seated all the time. It allows you to get out of a saddle stretch. Yeah, the roads were terrible, but hey, you just plow through. Everybody had the same conditions, so who cares? Just go through it.
It's interesting, Dirk. There's a quote in an article that I've got in front of me, and it was talking about your success and your training with Tinley and Molina. And they say, and it's Scott Molina. He says that your success after training with the boys was long overdue. Molina says, and I can't do his accent, so I won't try. He said, Dirk came to our workouts. It would tear the shit out of everybody. He just took a wee while to get it all together.
Well, I take it as a compliment. I saw
it would be meant that way too. He's got a lot of respect for you.
Yeah, no, they were all great. I mean, back then, I have to admit, during training, everybody was supportive. Everybody helped each other because we were true pioneers. We swam together, we rode together. But then when it comes closer to the race, you realize that everybody was up to their own little secrets. Yeah, understandably. But then again, on race day, so everybody kind of like did their own thing to get maybe a little edge, which is okay. I'll tell you another little story just in a second. But I'm full of stories. We all know that. But but at the end, I was so humbled when at the awards, I was able to give my speech, and I kind of like told the story how it is. And Tinley comes up and he said, you know what? I saw him working. I worked with him for 6 months, and he deserves this. I saw him working his butt off. I mean, he got killed, he got crushed, he got dropped, hell and back, and he's still here, and he deserves it. He worked for it. And then Molina's similar, right? So I was very humble.
Lovely.
The funny part was, I kept working with Tinley training because we were both in San Diego. And there was this one. So, by the way, he flew to Germany to see my coach back then after that. And my coach told him, you need first a couple of months of rest before I can train you, because Tinley loved training. But one of the funny episodes was we rode one day 8 hours. We rode from San Diego to Long Beach and back. And he said, what are you going to do next day? Want to go to the track? And I looked at him and said, what are you going to do on the track? And he said, well, I'm going to run 5 times 1,000. I said, we just rode 8 hours. There's nothing left in my legs. Well, what are you going to do tomorrow? I said, I'm going to ride 9 hours. And the next day, 10. We trained in blocks. It was very systematic. Like they call now the Norwegian method, so like new and revolutionary. There's maybe some of it new, but we trained very sophisticated back then already with very similar ways. And so on Sunday, I met him for a long run. I said, so how did the track workout go? And he said, shit, after 2, I threw in the towel. And I told you. I said, Tinley, I told you. You cannot do 8 hours and the next day go on the track. You need to train in blocks, get a rest, and then tackle the hard stuff. So we always discussed what works, like as a group, sometimes scientific, sometimes learning, but we always were there to help each other.
Yeah. Going back to New Zealand, you came off that wonderful bike, split 12 at the turnaround, 10-minute lead going into the marathon. I guess it was just you had the discipline down, you had your nutrition right, you knew what your heart rate was doing. I guess the marathon for you was just pretty straightforward. You were able to sort of just control everything at that point. Were you ever at any stage sort of worried about the marathon and what you had to do to get yourself first into the finishing chute?
Not really. Again, not sounding like arrogant or something, but I mean, I knew I had the training in my system.
Yeah,
right? I was prepared. The weather is not like Hawaii. Like I knew the weather would be in my favor. It's more like European climate. The course was hilly. Now I'm one of the heavier guys, but I was one of the best runners in the sport even back then. And so running, people always thought I'm not a good biker, which was kind of like, well, where's that coming from? Because it was all came down to the nutrition. If you just feed me,
Yeah.
I'm not talking Haribo gummy bears, but if you just feed me good food, I mean, as long as I can keep my heart rate up, I'm going.
Yeah.
So definitely a breakthrough there. And I came in a transition and said, "Oh, you just missed race course record by like 30 seconds." And I'm like, it's so irrelevant because I'm going for the course record overall. Like in my head, I'm like, if I run, I just did the math and I said, I know I can run a 250 off the bike. I knew that. And I did the math and I said, you're 12 minutes ahead. So somebody has to run in the 230s, which back then was not done.
No.
Nobody ran in 230s, and especially not in New Zealand on that hilly course. So I said, if you just stay true to yourself, no funny business, just run your splits, watch your heart rate, right? I kind of like sound like Paulo Curie a little bit, but yes, I watched my heart rate. I said, okay, stay at 158 or whatever it was. In running, I think it was a little bit lower. Stay to your heart rate, just follow it, and you will get to the finish line. And it was like 253 or something, with including transition, right? What people have to understand is that, you know, when later in the Tour de France, when they worked with Lance and they would say, oh, he's going to climb Alpe d'Huez in 30.13 seconds. And people go like, how do they know that? It's all math, right? If you know your stats, and we didn't have even power meters back then. God, I wish I would have had those. Oh, God, I don't know what that would have done with that. Power was such a game changer. But it's all math. At one point, it's all math. You can calculate it very, very accurately.
Yeah. What was the feeling like then? You know, you get that record. You're the second European after Pulikiuru to win an Ironman. You're the first German. You start the wave. The wave of Germans are coming. World, look out! What was the feeling like for you going down that finishing chute and crossing the line?
Clearly full excitement, right? You don't feel pain. You're on the cloud. And the audience throughout the whole race, I think it was even during the whole race on the course, like I said, you know, everybody cheered you on. I'm like, my name is not Mate, my name is Dirk, not understanding that they cheer you on. But, you know, I compared a little bit to Roth, where I think the reason people go to Roth is because of the people. And I always believe that if you race a race and there's no spectators, like the whole city and the spectators really make the race. It's not the money. It's not the course necessarily. It's really the combination of the course plus the people, how friendly they are. My guest family, I mean, just unbelievable. The whole town, you felt like home. Penticton is another one. Roth is one that's like this. So I'm not a big fan of going to the big cities and you're like out there, the course looks like a Formula One course. It's the sterile, like for example, some of the T100 races that they're doing, like the one on Daytona, to me, that wouldn't resonate. Racing around the oval. Again, it's for some it is, for me, it wouldn't be the course. I like to be with people. I like that they're engaged. They're the people that make the race, all the volunteers. And that's what I felt in New Zealand. So the finish line was just a culmination of everything when everybody's in the bleachers. But it really was throughout the whole run course.
We didn't get you back to defend your title in 1992. And there's a kind of a bizarre story behind that as to why we didn't get you back in terms of a kind of a strange injury, or the way the injury came about to your foot.
Oh, not that. So we were in a photo shoot with one of my sponsors, Pearly Zumi, up on Independence Pass in Colorado. And the sun sets, and we were on the road for like a week shooting. Ray was there. Taylor Finney was there, who was a part owner of Pearly Zumi. And we're doing this running scene, and the running scene is run along this trail, and then at the end there was this like jump into the sunset. And I think on the third or fourth take, I'm taking a leap and I come down, and the sun was so low that you couldn't see the ground anymore, and I land on a rock. And yep, boom, done. Completely tore my ligaments. Had nerve damage in the nerves that ran through all the little canals in the foot and metatarsals. And yeah, that cost me another year. That, I mean, but you know what, hindsight, it's part of the course, right? That's why I said the career can be very long, but it can be also very short. That's why I always tell people, have a backup plan. Don't just rely on the sport. The sport is not, compared to a lot of other sports, doesn't pay as well, maybe for the top athletes, but when you go across top 10, top 20, it's air gets thin up there for most people. And the biggest drawback was, though, that later on, 2 years later, I was diagnosed with racing all those years with a broken back.
Yeah.
And spinal stenosis were basically, I translated, you have a very, very strong engine compared to a car, right? So I had a very, very strong engine, which we discussed before. Huge engine, could supply a lot of fuel, oxygen to the muscles, big advantage in the field, especially long distance. But your electrical system, you got just screwed, right? Yeah. So you can't turn the engine on. You have no blinkers, no turn signals, no ignition. That really was probably the biggest humbling experience, that I felt something really big just got taken away from you. And realizing you had that all years.
Let's come back to that, because that bridges into the sort of the other direction your life goes on to. But you did come back to New Zealand in '93, and that was kind of a bit of a shocker in terms of New Zealand and the way the race was managed on the bike course. There was just so much confusion out there with the lead car taking, I think, Ken Glar and Scott Molina off the course, and times being adjusted and so on. And for you guys chasing, the confusion was, it just took everyone's head out of the game, kind of.
Yeah, my head was, you named it, my head was completely gone.
Yeah.
There was two, I got into the race. I know I showed up for the race, and everyone goes, oh my God, he's so lean. He's going to take this. Look at him. Well, the reason I was so lean, because I was with Peter Kropko in Toluca, Mexico, in altitude training. I got terribly sick. So for 3 weeks, I lost so much weight. So my power on the bike was dismal. But I knew the longer it would go, it would be fine, because weight would help me. But the power was completely off because of my weight loss and not having the miles in my legs. So I caught up to Glar and Molina. I was catching up like around 150K. I was, I think, 2 minutes down or something, or 1.5 minutes down, and catching up. And honestly, like 5K later, they tell me, oh, you're 10 minutes back. I'm like, what? Because they took a shortcut. So that was rough. Then I came in the transition, and probably shouldn't even have talked to officials, but probably spend 5 minutes talking to the officials and say, hey, listen, what's happening? That's not cool. That's not fair. What are you going to do? Oh, well, we had them bike a couple kilometers down the coast and up. All is good. It's all regular. I said, dude, where they cut the course, it was hilly. The coast is freaking flat. What are you talking about? So I basically put my head back on and said, you know what, just run. And I actually had a good run, like a 244, 243 or something.
Yeah.
But Ken is a very good runner, great athlete. Molina had his back issues, but catching Glar with spending 5 minutes in transition, talking to officials, say, how are you going to make this right? Oh, we did it right. And I said, well, that doesn't feel right to me. It was not a good day. Not for me.
But you still came second. But sadly...
Second is always first loser, right? To be honest.
I know you guys. Yeah, top end. I guess at that point, and what you were talking about before, the back issues really kicked in. And just explain, because as a young boy, you'd had an accident and I think a broken leg, but the back scenario had been missed at that point. So your whole adult life, you'd kind of had this thing sort of hanging over you
Yeah,
without knowing.
you mentioned skiing earlier, right? You mentioned how you got snow there in your area. So it's a very typical injury, for example, when you fall down on your butt on a ski slope, like icy ski slope, and you fall on your spine and you can break your back right above the pelvis. And that's what happened to me. I fell, but my leg broke. And back then, I was 9 years old. They treated the obvious. They put the leg in a cast. You're 3 weeks in the hospital. Back then, still with the elevated leg, not now like nowadays where you walk out with in a cast. And so when I left the hospital, because you laid 3 weeks in a bed, your back doesn't hurt anymore, right? But then 2 years later, I started always complaining about at 11, my back hurts. And so x-rays didn't really show anything because what happened was, think about the back when you look at from the back like a zipper. And you have these transverse processes at the back. And they basically hold the spine together. It's really like a zipper. And if one of those elements breaks off, and that's what happened, it snaps off, the bone dissolves, but you don't see it on an x-ray.
Yeah.
Over time, your spine basically starts moving forward. And with all the running and all the craziness you do, or I did, sure enough, at one point, the spine moves so far forward that basically the bones put pressure on the spinal cord. And they basically shut down your legs. So that's what started happening over time. I mean, again, blessed that I could do it for so many years. Would I've known this before, I never would have entered the sport, right? It doesn't make sense, but you don't know. So you just do what you want to do. You do what you can do to your best. But then in 94, they had MRIs and CAT scans. And, my leg just, it was not really the back that gave me that much trouble. It was just I couldn't feel my leg anymore. Like my toes and the pressure, and you get all these injuries on the left side, what's going on. And so then they did an MRI and they said, you're done. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, you have pars defect spinal stenosis. And said, translation, please. So they explained it to me, walked me through, showed me a picture and said, you fall one more time off the bike and you could be paralyzed. Or you get rear-ended and you could be paralyzed because it's hanging, your spine is hanging on the cliff.
Yeah.
I'm like, uh-oh. So, 94 was the end.
How old were you then, Dirk? Early 30s? What was your age then?
32.
32, yeah. Very, very young in a career, isn't it?
Yeah, I tell you, I mean, again, people might listen to this like, God, this guy's so full of himself. But I would argue, you know what, every time I said I'm going to do this, I did what I said I would do. Doesn't mean you always achieve it, but I really had aspirations. I'm saying I had aspirations. I'm not saying I'm doing it, but I had aspirations to go for Kona.
Yeah.
Right. I knew I had the material. I knew I spent 10 years in the sport. So maybe by 96, 97, you had a shot to go for it. At least maybe top 3. Right. Every day is different. But that was kind of like the trajectory because you're also at the right age. You're like in the mid-30s, right? And because the marathon runners back then, they were all Carlos Lopez and stuff. They were all approaching the mid-30s, and that's when they really achieved their peak.
Yeah.
So you knew that you had some tenure in the sport into the late 30s, but it was not meant to be.
But there's a lovely footnote to your Ironman story, and we will come to that because you did find your way back, but in between time after leaving the sport, just quietly exiting the sport because of the issues you've outlined, you built, as so many people do in the sport, fine achievers away from the sport. And to that end, you've your corporate career, I guess initially with Jenny Craig and Herbalife and so on, you've had a pretty amazing run, I guess, in that way, and it achieved a high level of excellence too.
Yeah, I think, it's, I believe that a lot of times you have to be in the right place at the right time. I'm going to be honest about it. I had great mentors. I had great tutors. We all know how the world now works, where you go on LinkedIn and you apply for 1,000 jobs, and who knows what happens, right? A machine might read it, and who knows? It's really about connecting with people, having a good network, having good mentors. And I always had that. I never had a father figure, as I mentioned before. My mom took me back at the age of 6, but I never had a father figure. So a lot of people, like either in the sports or in business, became kind of one of my mentors and tutors, and I'm grateful for that. Without them, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. But then also the grit, right? The grit is, don't let go. There's always a new day. Just because one person says no and you might not fit the bill, go for the next one, and connect. Because I'm a big believer that a piece of paper, you can't tell the story. That's why we're connecting today. You talk, you connect, you compare notes, and you learn about the person. And I think that's what got me to where I'm at today, connecting with people. At Nestle, you mentioned Jenny Craig. It was really funny how it's kind of like weight loss, diet industry. And the CEO from Switzerland, Nestle is a big, as you know, $120 billion company. And the CEO from Nestle came over to visit, and he wanted to qualify for Boston, was looking for somebody that could join him on the long run. So I joined him. We started talking, and at one point he says, why are you at Jenny Craig with your background? And we started talking more and more, and I spare you the details. But at one point he said, what do you think about the brand Power Bar? And I was brutal to him. And I said, you know what? I think you screwed it up. And he goes like, tell me more. I said, well, you bought it, and you just think you are in Walmart and Target and all the big box retailers, and it sells itself, but it doesn't. I can tell you that when I came back in the sport 10 years later and I eat a Power Bar, all the other athletes look at me and go, what are you eating? What is that? Nobody eats that stuff. It's Cliff, Hammer, and everything else. So if you don't engage with your core audience early on, they're never going to learn about you. Well, guess what? 2 months later, he said, okay, I need you on Power Bar, run field marketing North America to gain our brand share back, right? But when do you ever have the opportunity to be honest and truthful to yourself and a CEO listening? If my manager would have asked me, I would have been probably fired, because they would go like, dude, this guy's too intimidating. He's running a rope. So it's all the right place with the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. And then Dirk, your return to the sport, I mean, it's a wonderful redemption story in so many ways.
Yeah, I don't know if it's redemption, but honestly, Hellriegel winning Hawaii in '97, and I raced with Hellriegel when he was young, and what a phenomenal, what you're talking about is Überbiker. Like, that kid is insane. So you saw it coming, and he was hungry. But then so I had my surgery in 2003, so I knew I couldn't win. So the blood still goes, right? You want to compete, but I couldn't. And so in 2003, I felt comfortable about the surgeries that they were proposing for my spine. Did 2 surgeries, took me forever, as you might know, to get back running 5K, like 2 years, forever. But then when Faris, and all those guys, Norman, Faris, Al-Satan, they all trained in San Diego. So I saw them at the pool. I saw how hard they worked. And then finally, Faris in 2005 and Norman, they won it. And I go like, man, I have to go back. It's just, now they motivated me to go back, right? It was an inspiration. I just have to see if I can do this again. And sure enough, and then the trash talk started, right? I mentioned, I would love to do it again. And they're like, Dirk, you're in the 130, 140 lane. What are you talking? Like in swimming, right? I was just cruising. What are you talking? If you would do an Ironman, and you can't even keep up on the bike with us, what are you talking about? What would you do if you would do an Ironman? I said, I'm pretty sure I can still pull a 930. And they're like, yeah, right. So trash talk was starting. And so now I had to deliver. And so sure enough, it was like 9:35 in Arizona or something after 6 months. But yeah, we have funky, weird ways to motivate each other sometimes.
But you've edited the story, because through all that, with your back. All you for a decade essentially you couldn't really bike or run. You just swam. Your weight sort of moved and so on. And I think the footnote that I was alluding to, this was and forget about the trash talk side of it. This was pretty cool for your family to see Dad back out there doing what Dad did really well.
Yeah. I mean, trash talk is one thing. The highlight, I think, was when my son, there was two highlights. So we're at Ironman, Arizona, and the day before you have carbo loading party, and they have the big merchandising tent. And we're walking through the merchandising tent, and my daughter and my wife back then, they got like an Ironman t-shirt, the pink one, so that I could see them on the course. And my son walks out with me, and I said, Nick, you don't want to have a shirt? And he goes like, no. I said, why not? Well, I would feel like a poser. And he's like 10 or 11 years old. I'm like, tell me more. I said, not until I've done an Ironman would I wear an Ironman shirt.
Wow.
I'm like, wow, respect. So then after the race, I think it was great. He goes like, Dad, that was phenomenal. I want to do an Olympic. I want to do a half. I want to do this. I want to do an Ironman. Yeah, it was a big, my house never, ever had a trophy, a picture, a medal in the house. Never. They didn't even know what that is. Not until kids like in school later on would tell them, hey, I looked up your dad. He's an Ironman. And my kids go, what? What were you talking about? Like, I did not want to have that pressure on my kids to feel like, oh, I have to be like Dad. I have to be this athlete. So that's why they never were exposed to any of that until, yes, I decided, you know what? I want to do this again. I want to go to Kona again, for whatever reason, for whatever wicked reason we go there.
Fantastic. So that's wonderful for your family. And in terms of lifestyle now, you're still doing a little bit. Any events at all, or what's your sporting life like these days, Dirk?
The riding still. I mean, running. They fused it, but the first thing they said is your running days are over, right? And I'm like, whatever. We're not good listeners when it comes to that. So, but running really is not good, despite the fusion. Swimming, I have to admit, is just too boring. Unless there's a master's program, I'm not going in the water. And then biking is really what still keeps me going, especially, once I discovered a power meter. Oh my God. Heart rate is one thing, but power meters, wow.
Yeah, they're cool, aren't they?
So, yeah, a lot of biking. And now, honestly, this is actually fresh off the ticker. I'm not getting younger, and I decided to go probably a little bit into a semi-retirement. At this point, my wife will still keep working. And honestly, I'm looking forward. We're moving actually to a very cool area close to Big Bear Arrowhead at the foothills of the mountains. Redlands, it's one of the biggest or longest standing cycling classics in the US, and very good cycling community. I met her there through cycling. So we're relocating. We're based right now in LA, and it was kind of like taking a semi-retirement approach. I'm done with the commute. Go into the big cycling community. And honestly, yeah, I'm excited to be more on the bike and also get probably a little bit more back into coaching, either at a smaller scale or at a bigger scale. So I'm talking to some of the bigger organizations on how that could work. No names at this point. This is really just developed in the last month or two. But yeah, coaching, I did it for a while. And then when I joined Power Bar, I felt it was a conflict of interest, right? So I told my athletes, I can't be here at the race, activated for Power Bar and coach you at the same time. That's just, you have to look for a new coach. That was hard, but I would like to get back into that at whatever level, either international, national. So I'm excited to spend more time on the bike.
Fantastic.
A lot of time on the bike.
A lot of time on the bike. Dirk, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful for the time that you have given to us at the Old School Tri Show, and you've been a pioneer, not just in the 40-year history of Ironman New Zealand, but on so many different levels in the sport. So thank you for your time, and we wish you all the very best for whatever direction your life takes you in.
No, thank you for inviting me, giving me the opportunity. Thanks for sharing. I hope a lot of people listen to it, draw some inspiration from it. I know we're the old guys. The world moved on. And when I come with my wife to New Zealand, I ring you up. So there we go. Now we ride together.
That would be fantastic.
That would be great. It would be wonderful to connect.